So, what have we learned about Kickstarter as a platform for games? Well, most of the time the games funded with it come out without fulfilling most of the promises made, or the game never comes out at all. It's become known for that. But one of the only good projects that come from the site that everyone knows about is Shovel Knight. Shovel Knight was huge back in its time. A lot of people had faith in the project, and it had a shit ton of stretch goals to make, and shockingly, it's one of the few projects that I'm familiar with that has completed every single one of its stretch goals. This game has several different campaigns that are fleshed out enough to be separate games, and in fact there's enough in Shovel Knight Treasure Trove to review 4.5 games in total. Shovel of Hope and Plague of Shadows, Spectre of Torment, and King of Cards and the Fighting Game, which is an interesting game. There is honestly so much to speak about with this game, which is why I've started making this retrospective. First up is the first 1.5 games in this package, Shovel of Hope and Plague of Shadows, though fair warning, if you're a fan of Plague of Shadows, because I don't have the highest opinion on it, but that'll come much later. For now, let's get talking about the game proper. So, the plot of Shovel of Hope is really simple. Once upon a time, there were a treasure hunting duo known as Shovel Knight and Shield Knight. They went on many adventures and enjoyed each other's comfort and company. One day, they went to a tower where something happened to Shield Knight, and she disappeared. Disheartened, Shovel Knight quits adventuring and goes to live his own life. But a while later, the Enchantress and her Order of No Quarter Knights showed up and started trying to rule the land. So once again, Shovel Knight picks up his shovel to try and figure out if this event has any connection to Shield Knight. It's a really simple plot, but I actually really enjoy that. It makes telling it really easy. But the plot may seem simple, but the amount of interesting NPCs and funny jokes make going through this game a lot of fun. I would heavily recommend that you go through and play this game to experience it yourself, because there's just so much to mention that I can't really get into everything I like here. But with that said, that's the first section, and the most boring one done. Now I can get into things I really would like to speak about for this game. The gameplay is the funnest part of Shovel Knight. So, last week's video was on Cave Story. Now, I really like how that game is controlled, and there's nothing wrong with floaty controls. But I really love how tight and responsive the controls in this game are. It makes it so easy to do precise tricks and stuff. And it makes me addicted to trying to use sub-weapons to do fun tricks. Shovel Knight is a very simple to control character. He moves when you press the button, and he stops right when you let go. This includes his jumping and air movement. He at base form has a standard attack, being a regular shovel swipe. Honestly, it might be a shovel, but it may as well be a sword with how they use it. But Shovel Knight can also bounce off of enemies and objects with a downward shovel drop, much like what Link can do in Zelda 2. Actually, I would say that the game reminds me of how an actual Zelda 2 sequel might play with tighter controls. In the stages, there is one main path with a ton of hidden paths with gold and stuff, as well as collectibles like music note pages. Gold is really cool and rewarding. You can actually use the gold on upgrades, sub-weapons, health upgrades, magic upgrades, etc. The exploring aspect of this game makes this and all the other campaigns a lot of fun. The stages are well designed. It uses the Mario stage rule. 1. Introduce obstacle in a safe environment. 2. Ramp up the difficulty of the obstacle slowly throughout the stage, reaching a climax of the difficulty. 3. Move on to something else afterwards. This makes a lot of the stages fun and makes sure none of the gimmicks overstay their welcome, and it makes things a lot less boring. To get to the stages and villages with Shop, you have to navigate the world map to go to each stage, which is pretty average by world map standards, but sometimes mini stages or wandering boss fights appear, kind of like in Super Mario Bros. 3, or any of the new Super Mario Bros. Games. Actually, one of the campaigns are very similar to Super Mario Bros. 3, which I'll get to in time. This game has a lot of really fun sub-weapons on top of that, and we should get to that. So in most stages, you can find and buy sub-weapons from a guy named Chester. They are out of the way usually, but not by much, if you have a keen eye for hidden passages. All of the sub-weapons are amazingly fun to use in the stages and in boss fights. I didn't get a ton of use out of most of them, but for a good chunk of them I had tons of fun. Namely the Chaos Sphere against the boss fights and in levels, and the Flare Wand against bosses like Spectre Knight, were some of the more memorable uses. I also got a lot of use out of the Dust Knuckles. To be honest, I felt like a JoJo character when I used it against a Mole Knight. It drained his health so fast. But I should go over each sub-weapon for clarity. The fishing rod one is one of the first items that you have access to. Being in the first village visit, it's very eh. You can fish in shiny spots and use it to grab lost gold if it's below you. It does a lot of damage if you manage to hit an enemy with it, but good luck timing it. Its only use for it is gaining a little extra gold every once in a while. The Chaos Sphere, on the other hand, is one of the most useful weapons against bosses or larger enemies in general. In every Shovel Knight review I see, everyone always complains about the phase lock and says it invalidates every other weapon. But people sleep on the Chaos Sphere so much. But then again, this is coming from someone who has every single last challenge and feat unlocked in every campaign, so maybe I just have bias because I've learned how to beat bosses really easily, so. The Fire Wand is the most standard weapon in this game. But standard does not mean worthless. This thing is great for any Mega Man fan who wants to attack from a distance, and it's useful against King Knight and Spectre Knight especially, since you can combo the hell out of Spectre Knight with it since the Chaos Sphere does not work well on him. Oh dear, here we are, the one item everyone complains about and shit. Well, the Phase Locket is an overpowered piece of crap that I do not like to use, and I actively avoid using it in most cases. I put my own rules on using it, that being for air stalling. I've saved myself on many occasions, and honestly, that's a lot more fun to use than instead of just using every 3 seconds to avoid enemies. Take a look at this clip of me invalidating a challenge by using the Phase Locket. The Dust Knuckles are very situational. Despite this, I have many cases where I use them against both sub-bosses and dirt blocks to speed through many enemies. Very simple item, but I feel like a JoJo character when I use it. The Throwing Anchor is a Castlevania sub-weapon. Like, it's literally just the throwing axe, but it's very spammable, and against the second Black Knight boss fight and Propeller Knight's fight, it's pretty good as well as if there's an enemy above you. The Alchemy Coin is a really slandered item. We stand this item here. It's really good for trying to get a lot of money fast, especially in the feat run where you can only visit each location once. It's RNG, but it's really good for speeding up the grinding process. Don't slander my boy the Alchemy Coin. You will be blocked if you slander it. The mobile gear, on the other hand, we slander this thing the hell here. It has literally no other use than being a stepping stool or a tool to use to skip platformings. Oh, and doing this to Tanker Knight. It's just very, very boring. The closest item to useless here. The War Horn is one I never get much use out of. It's really just an AoE thing that damage things, and it makes for a funny way to kill the Enchantress. It's an item I use the least in every playthrough. I have played this game a few times for this review since I wanted to give each relic a fair chance for this video, especially the ones you get later on in the game. One criticism: I really think the system would have benefited from each weapon having its own meter like in the old Mega Man games. It would force you to use other relics when you run out, instead of having a magic meter that was relevant for all of them. So, with how well all these weapons are designed, the bosses must be well designed too, right? Right? Yep. There are a ton of bosses in this game, and most of the fun I have from this game is trying to find the quickest way to defeat them with the sub-weapons. I feel so powerful now that I have memorized their attack patterns. Beating all the feats and challenges does that to a man. Seriously, quick rant. There's this Spectre of Torment feat that requires you to beat an entire stage without taking damage and beat a boss without taking damage. I won't talk any further on that challenge because I will have a breakdown if I do. Anyways, case in point, the bosses in this game are well designed and can be overcome with enough memorization. The game rewards you for learning the most efficient way to take down most bosses, and every time I make it to the boss rush and beat it without dying quickly, I really feel awesome. This is why my favorite armor is the one that lowers defense but raises the magic limit. It just makes the game more fun in my humble opinion. I felt awesome destroying bosses in seconds using the combination of relics. Sure, it's safer to use the Phase Locket, but it's a lot more cool to use the Dust Knuckles or Chaos Sphere, Flare Wand in awesome ways to be done with the bosses in seconds. This game really does do Mega Man boss design really well, and while this is a short section, I think it was definitely a necessary one, since I don't really know where to stick at this praise. This game looks really good. Its art style is very clean and sharp looking. Everything has a lot of color, and the variety in level themes makes this a really interesting game to look at, visually. This game clearly uses the pixelated art style that a lot of indie games use. However, unlike most indie games that use this style, they don't use it as a crutch to take shortcuts. They do as much as they can with the style, including having more than 16 colors at one point, and having the backgrounds have a ton of depth and all. Look at that parallax scrolling, see look. Hats off to anyone who can do sprite art like this, because this game looks hella crisp. The animation also looks good, and a lot of the NPC designs are sound. I like how a lot of the enemies look like over-exaggerated medieval things like armored knights, Vikings, alchemists, and plague doctors. It's really fun to look at. Another thing that's really fun is the music. Oh man, the music for this game are all eargasms with how good they sound for 8-bit music. Jake Kaufman makes some amazing music, my guys. I'm not the best at explaining what I like about music, but I think it's really good and can sound heroic, foreboding, and very melodic. I really like the music for Pridemore Keep. The lich art is really good. The boss music for the Wandering Boss's sound is great. And another thing I really like is that bosses of all the main levels have a remix of their level theme as their boss theme. Graphics and sound aren't everything, obviously, but here it makes everything much more fun if I'm being honest. So, after going through the 3 parts of the map, we get to the Tower of Fate, and it's just like the old Dr. Wily stages in those Mega Man games. You have an entry level and a level inside of the fortress with a boss rush at the end. I want to start with the first level of this. The music is straight fire, it sounds really good and it gets you pumped to take on the challenge. They use several gimmicks from the first half of this game in the stage. They use several gimmicks from the first half of this game in the stage, and they make them work and present them in new ways that were not used before. It makes this really exciting, and it tests your skills with familiar issues. And at the end of the first stage, you reach another fight against Black Knight, who has been powered up by the Enchantress. And it's a tough fight. It's thrilling to find a fun way to beat this boss quickly, including swapping through the relics to deal with him becoming airborne. Probably one of the only times I use the throwing anchor ever. One of my favorite boss fights, to be honest. The boss fight music straight up slaps. Here, listen. The second stage is also really good. The stage here uses gimmicks from the second half of the game, like the water from Treasure Knight stage and the ice in the ice stage's Rainbow Bird section. Although I didn't use it in this section because I wanted to do a stupid trick. It uses a tense remix of the first Tower of Fate stage. At the end of this, you go into the boss rush against all of the Order of No Quarter, and the setup for it is really funny. You literally crash their dinner and have to fight them all in a row. You also fight them in random order, which makes it a bit more interesting. I had a lot of fun flipping through the weapons list to go fast. I forgot to mention this earlier, but you can actually flip through the weapons relic list while waiting, which is especially useful here. After this, if you choose to, you can rescue the knights by pulling them up. After this, you reach the last stage where you are met with an eerie track. You fall for a small bit and land. This level is really short, but foreboding. Fun fact, if you go left after falling, you can find an extra room with a lot of stuff like money and health and restoring items. After this, we reach the final boss fight against the Enchantress, and this one's pretty hard. You have to be careful with your downward thrust since the floor here is made out of dirt blocks, and destroying too much will leave you vulnerable. You also can't afford to destroy a lot of the floor. My choice for this fight is to use the Flare Wand to attack her while she's above the blocks, the Throwing Anchor to hit her when she's under the stage, and the Propeller Dagger to go past the pits that you create inevitably. I also like trying to reflect her projectiles back at her. It's really good for dealing a good amount of damage in a short period of time. Honestly, I got all these skills from completing the challenge mode and feats. I wasn't kidding about those being hell. Afterwards, we figure out that the Enchantress is actually a possessed Shield Knight. I mean, the twist is pretty obvious, but I don't mind that. After you fight the Spirit, which I had a lot of fun fighting with a Propeller Dagger, we see the ending play out afterwards, where the tower falls and the credits show what happens to everybody you've met along the journey. It's a great ending to a great game. We're done now, right? We've covered the first campaign. Surely you'll give Plague of Shadows its own video, right? No, LMAFO. I do not like Plague of Shadows. Sorry, not sorry. I'm gonna make this quick, since I don't want to waste a whole video on why I dislike it. Basically, I dislike this campaign because aside from the plot and a small chunk of the levels, it's literally the same exact campaign as Shovel Knight. You play as Plague Knight who throws bombs instead of a shovel, and I'm only wasting one section to talk about this. I'm going to admit I am biased, and you can disagree with me, I won't be mad, but let's just go over the main general overview, and then I'll go on. The control of this mode is just bad. Plague Knight controls are very floaty, but not in a good way like in Super Mario 3 or Cave Story. Plague Knight slips a lot, and the control on the ground feels a bit twitchy and meh. He also jumps lower than Shovel Knight, but he can double jump. I do actually like the airtime you can get, but I often find myself being flung around uncontrollably and having a hard time altogether. This gameplay style would be fine if the level design was designed for it. However, the level design is almost the exact same as Shovel Knight's campaign, and if you choose not to go after any secrets, it's literally the same as Shovel Knight's campaign, and his gameplay style does not go well with this level design. Before you call and say, oh well, you just need to get good, you're just bad at this mode, I'll have you know I beat all of the feats and challenges in this, so I have played this mode extensively. I am familiar with it, so do not call me a pleb. I am good at this game. The story is pretty cute though, admittedly. Probably my favorite out of the 4 campaigns. It's sad that it was wasted on this one though. Basically, Plague Knight has a crush on Mona, the green lady in the potion minigame that you see in the first town, and wants to prove himself to her by making an ultimate potion, but he can't see that she already likes him. There are some fun moments such as entering the town and being refused, having to enter the base of the underground lab below by blowing up someone's house, or fighting Shovel Knight in the boss rush in Explodatory. Honest, there's not much here for me to say about it. Even the main gimmick of the game of making your bombs isn't that fun to me, due to the fact that you'll just find the combination that you want and you'll only ever use that. Perhaps only to use a set. You'll only ever change it if you want a different throwing angle. Like I said, I feel like this is the objectively worst campaign in Shovel Knight, and I have no desire to replay it after this video. Just know that I don't think it's the worst game ever. Conclusion. Shovel Knight is a really good game, and it's the true face of indie games to this day. This is just a conclusion to this video, since there are still 2 other campaigns to review. But anyways, Shovel Knight is an extremely worthwhile game. If you don't want to pay $40 for the full package, that's completely understandable and fine. Not everybody has $40 they can just drop. But luckily for you, each of the campaigns in this package can be bought separately for $10 each. So I'd encourage you to try Shovel Knight. Next video will cover Spectre of Torment. It's the first of the Halloween videos I have planned for next month, since it's October. This has been a Snake Solid video, and I am out of here. Are you through?